Good day, everyone. This video is a follow-up from my spring 2022 spatial analysis of social data class. We went over in Excel a couple what I consider more basic function features, tools to get used to just operating using Excel. This video, if you watched some of my other ones before, it's similar in nature, but since it's a new semester, new class, everything with it, I'm going to combine a few different things and also toss in how to snip and take some screenshots with that as well. Not shockingly, what you see in front of you is this similar data portal that I've used for years. It's Little Rock's, but with that, it lets us have a good data set that I'm used to using, but also I can download and show you how to work through. So if you're wanting to follow along, you can see the URL at the top here that I'm going to. You can also just Google Little Rock Data Portal. It should bring you to this main page. If I scroll down into Safe City, it's going to open up a lot of the data sets that it has related to public safety at large. The primary one that I'm interested in this go around is the Little Rock police statistics. This starts in January of 2017 and goes through current date. You can see it was just updated 2 days ago, so it is fairly current with the updates it has. If I click on it, it's going to take me into the general data options for it, some descriptions to it, how many rows there are, how many columns. And really the idea is the column has a name, so this would be our variable name. So when we take this into Excel, this is going to be our top row. So if I hit show all, it's going to start with incident date. That's going to have date and time in the same field. And it goes into city, state, lat, long, all of that together. And then you can see if you scroll down a bit more, what that data will look like in much more of a spreadsheet format for you. At the top, if you wanted to, and if you're used to Socrata and kind of their products within Tyler Technologies, there's a larger kind of part to it. If you clicked on View Data, this takes you into it. So if you want to get into, and we'll do this in other videos itself, you can apply filters, you can visualize. This is where it will make charts, tables, things that you want to do within it. For our purposes and the purposes of the class, we want to take this data and then use it in Excel, and eventually we'll use it in other programs, be it Google or ArcGIS Pro. But for now, if we click on Export CSV for Excel, so for those of you who are not familiar, CSV just means it's a comma separated file. So between every field of data or data point in it, it's going to have a comma that separates it. If you're working on a PC and if you just click it when you download, it'll open up in Excel for you. If you are using a Mac, like I've said many times in class, I am not a Mac person. Direct your computer into Excel to open the CSV. Oftentimes it will want to open in numbers for you. Now when you open this data set, depending on the type of computer you are on, it might prompt you with an option up here. It's a yellow toolbar that comes up and asks you to save it as another file type. You can see up here that I still have a CSV, so oftentimes what I recommend is to change it to a workbook. So to do that, if we go to File here at the top, Save As, and all I'm going to do is change this from a CSV to the workbook at the top. Down the line, this will be super beneficial in terms of when it comes to tools and formulas and functions we want to use. We need to have it as a workbook, especially when we save it and try to reopen it. Get in the habit of doing this. Every now and then I'll forget, and then when you go to run a certain technique, you can't, or you get the wrong response from Excel. So just get in the habit of just resaving it in general. So when I hit save, you can see at the top now it's changed to a workbook file up here. So we're in good shape. So oftentimes what I show people when we first get into Excel is some of the basics to make it much more presentable when you're looking at it. When you open a data set, you might see that everything's a bit merged together, not merged, but shrunken, overlapping, so you can't make everything out. An easy way to get the contents to auto-fit to each column, the cell itself, if you click this triangle up here that highlights the entire worksheet, and then double click on the line that's between A and B, that auto-fits the contents to the longest cell value in each cell to every distinct column, so we know what it looks like. It spaces it out. So especially with dates and time, when you see the hashtags, that doesn't mean necessarily that something's wrong. It just doesn't have enough room to show what all is in there. So again, if you double click just that one, it will space it out and auto fit it for you. Looking at the data, we can see a few different things in it. We have a date and time field. We have an incident number, the police district, so Little Rock is split up into distinct police districts. With that, we have offense codes. Those oftentimes relate to much more of the UCR side of things, but of course, everything's switching over to NIBRs. We have our offense description that's a lot easier to make sense of. Weapon type, location, city, state, zip, then our latitude and longitude, which makes our life easy from a spatial standpoint because we already have the latitude and longitude, our coordinates. We don't have to go in and geocode the data. Again, if we're looking at this data and you see that there's missing data when it comes to that location field, look over to the offense description and we see it's rape and it's a sex-based offense by itself. So that makes sense. We want to hide some of that data so that people don't see and know where rapes are occurring from a victim standpoint. We want to protect some of that with it, especially given how many rapes do occur in a home setting. That adds as another layer of anonymity and protection and privacy to victims of crime with that. So now when we're in Excel, a lot of our time at the beginning is spent within our Home tab, sometimes Insert and Data. That's where we spend a lot of time in the course. But with this one, it's getting comfortable with what we're looking at. The Home field is very similar to other Microsoft products of what you can do with the font, centering, left align, right align, where the texts are located, merging cells, wrapping text itself. The one that I always recommend paying attention to when we're in Excel is the type of cell it is itself. So this one, it's all general, but if we come over here, we see that the date time field is custom. I say pay attention to this because when we insert columns, oftentimes it's going to grab whatever is closest to it on the left, so it mimics that one. Oftentimes if I insert a new column, an easy way to double check is just highlight that column, and we'll do it here in a bit, and just make sure it is a general one, no specified format going into it. Some good functions and tools to get used to out of the gate are the sort and filter functions within Excel. This just makes your life easy. Depending on what you want to do, it's a good way to start. So oftentimes what I do is just highlight the worksheet again. That's everything in it. I just come up here to custom sort. What I want to start with is do by incident date. So again, I just put in incident date, and I want to do newest to oldest. So by doing that, I click OK, and it reorders the entire sheet from our most recent incident. That'd be 11:57 p.m. on 1/24, which would have been Monday, I believe. Yes. So that's at least a good point. We know that's working. We can sort the data based on that. You also might be interested in sorting it actually based on your offense description. So if we want to look at that, oftentimes alphabetical is used. You can do either way. But now we see ag assaults are all at the top. They're not all, since it was already sorted by date, of course it's going to follow that. But you can see here that we have it now sorted primarily based on the offense description. Pretty good way, pretty easy way to get through our data and just sort it very quickly. You can also do it by firearm. If you wanted to, you could do it by incident location. Some will have overlapping addresses. You can see in here. With that, you can do offense code, police district, everything with that. It's truly just sorting, organizing your data. That's a good way of thinking about that. If we wanted to move on and say we wanted to apply a filter, this is oftentimes what we use more as kind of our precursor step, is to filter out to a subset of data. So say I was interested in only looking at offenses that occurred in this data set and with a firearm. Let's just go firearm in general. There's going to be a couple different options in here. But you can see this filter option, when I clicked it, it gave us this drop down menu for every variable label. And what it did was scan that entire data set and pulled out our options within it. It automatically selects everything. I don't want everything, so if I select all, it takes the check mark out of everything. And now if I click firearm, hit OK, it reduces this data set to only incidents that have a firearm. If you look over here in our row IDs, you can see where there are a couple of jumps. This is identifying that there are other crimes that occurred that are in the data set, but they did not have a firearm listed there. Yes, we could have identified firearm, handgun, shotgun, all that. This is just one example. A good habit to get used to is if you want to create a subset. So right now when I highlight A1, I'm going to hold down Control and Shift on the keyboard at the same time. I'm going to hit the right arrow and then the down arrow. And what this does is select just the data fields that you filtered. I'm going to hit Control C to copy the data set. And down here when you have that plus button, it's allowing you to add a new sheet. So if I add that, it's a blank sheet here. If I hit Control V, that's our paste. It brings over only our firearm data. Again, since this is highlighted, I'm going to double click to auto fit our content. There we go. And we're better that way. What I also recommend, since we have our original data set here, get in the habit of relabeling what this subset of data relate to. This is just firearm crime specifically, so I just threw that in there so I knew what this subset of data looked like. Now with this, there's a couple different things that we could do after this. We'll get into advanced stuff, but to come back to the original data set, since we still have a filter applied, what I always recommend to people is come back, clear everything so you still have a working file that's the original one. And say if you were sick and you didn't need a filter anymore, you're just tired of it, unclick it, you're good to go. You're back to your original data set, nothing big to worry on. What I went over in class and kind of show some of the highlights of what you can do in Excel is oftentimes for our spatial class, we're going to, yes, deal with the location part of it. So we have the lat and long, we can map that very quickly. We have our incident location, which makes life easy. But also we deal with a lot of time and temporal characteristics. So if I right click on B and hit insert, it's going to insert empty columns here. I'm going to do 3 different ones here. And if you see, when I click down here on any of the cells, you can see up here that it's still recognizing these as custom cells. That's what I do not want. So if I highlight these, I'm going to click B and drag across to D. And just I'm going to go up here and hit general again. And now when I go through, all of these have been updated to be general ones. The cool part is I'm going to show a couple different ones and techniques, and hopefully the day of the week actually works on this video. Those in class saw I had some lovely issues with Excel actually reading it as a day of the week and auto-filling like it's supposed to. Let's say I'm first interested in the hour itself. So hour, we want to take this out of the formula here. We recognize that that's military time, so 23. So if I hit enter, that's our variable name, it's our column name. Equal signs brings up the ability to call on specific functions or formulas within Excel. So if I type hour here, and this one specifically is designed for this to tease out the hour, open paren, click on A2 here. If I close it off, hit enter, we now see that it pulls it across and it's 23. Again, it would be a pain in the ass if I asked you to do this, how many cells are there? Over 77,000 times individually. The easy way to get around that is to simply, once you do the formula once, and we'll get into advanced functions of this, so this won't always work or you have to change it a little bit. If you double click on this green box down here, that's going to flash fill downwards the same formula but with the updated cells. So if I go down one, it's now calling on A3, this one's A4, so it's still pulling that across. Pretty handy. Another good example, since we have multiple years of data here, if I hit year as the column label again, and then equal sign, year, and I want to pull out the year from this date formula. Again, Excel is very good at recognizing date and timestamps. So if I click on this, close off the paren again and hit enter, it pulled out 2022 for us. Similar to what we did with hour and that auto-filling down, if I do the same thing here, we're good to go. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see 2019 to 2019. So it's an easy way to spot check your data that way. Now let's get into the one that I had the issue in class, is the lovely day of the week. I say this because it's pretty handy once it starts to recognize this, because you can use it in a lot of different capacities. First, let's change our date field here to be a long date, and I'll show you that. So I highlighted column A, I clicked on it, came up here, long date. You can see I like this because it gives day of the week and it actually spells out the month versus the numeric part of it. Since these are already organized, let's see if this picks it up for me. So I'll type Monday probably quite a few times to see if it will start to recognize it. So once I did go across enough or down further enough to where I switched to Sunday, you can see how that's in the gray kind of translucent color of font itself. Excel picked up what I'm trying to do based on the column that's to the left of this one. So since I put day of week immediately next to incident date, it's trying to pick up a pattern there. What am I doing that's similar across these two columns itself? And you can see it picked it up. So since that already started to autofill, if I hit enter now, it's going to go down and do the rest of those cells for me, so I don't have to do that over 77,000 times. It teases out day of week for me. Pretty handy, beneficial, easy to do. We can do that with a number of different fields, and we'll do it later in the class, but that's a good way to get started and used to some of this data. Now in class, I showed an example of kind of what we'll build towards and kind of get into as the semester progresses. One was a quick pivot table at the end. Another one was an easy way to take our data in Excel and just visualize it in a map pretty quickly, because we have latitude and longitude. It's easy to display that way in Excel. So if we want to do a quick pivot table, all I'm going to do is highlight the sheet of data here. So I've clicked on cell A1, holding down Control Shift. This time I'm going to do down arrow and then right arrow. Again, that's just highlighting my data set as a whole. With that, I'm going to come up here and click on the Insert tab. And from there, I want to insert a pivot table. I traditionally, and I always gear towards having it go into a new worksheet. So that's going to make a new sheet down here. And it's going to be related to the data that I have highlighted here. So I click OK. Again, I get in the habit of just labeling what I'm doing here. So it's a pivot table. And the pivot table, once you have your data highlighted, it's pretty good and pretty instinctive in what you want to do with it. So what we talked about in class, we showed offenses for 2021 based on the offense type and the count of it. So on this one, we might be interested in the year as our column. So we have 2017 through part of 2022, our current year. And say we're still interested in our offense description, so our rows. So we can see the different crime types that are within this data set. And what we need now is some type of variable that acts as a value. When I say a value, we want to count something. So we know everything in our data set has an incident number. So if we look here and just drag and click and pull this down, it reads as a count. We'll get into later in the semester how you can change this from a count to a sum to other different options within it. But this provides us a pretty good idea of what's going on within Little Rock for the past 5 years crime-wise. Nationwide in 2020, we knew there was a crime increase nationwide in violence. Little Rock, we can see that too. If we just look over here at ag assault, we see that there was an increase in 2020 from 2019. Even in 2021, we saw a larger increase that way. If we come down to murder as well, you can see in 2020, there was an increase in homicide, and even in 2021, there was a much larger homicide count. And this is the second highest in the city count-wise, going back to about the 60s. So you can see that there is an increase even in violence in 2021 compared to 2020, when we already saw quite a large uptick in that. You can even see ag assault from the 3 years prior to that, and it's relatively between 23 and 2,500, and then it jumps over 3,000 for that. So it's a good idea in understanding, just understanding crime occurrence. We can use this and also look at spatial attributes in that. It's an easy way to understand the data set very quickly. It's just generally pivot tables. I'm a big fan of them. You can do a lot with pivot tables. This is just one and a very short description of one pivot table. We'll do much more with them, but for now, this class is much more focused on the spatial side, and we'll touch on pivot tables just as a cool way to visualize some of the data. So we're good there. Since we already made this firearm subset of data, you might as well see what this looks like in Little Rock then. In class, we did the handgun. This one's just firearm, nothing too different. So similar again, I'm going to click A1, hold down Control and Shift, highlight the entire data set by the right and down arrow. And if I come over to Insert again, this time I want to insert a 3D map. As a reminder, if you are a lovely Mac user, this is the function that you do not have access to on a Mac. You can do a map. We'll get into this. This is better at the county level, state level, or even country. We'll do some of this so you can see how that looks and some of the cool functionality of it. I'm a fan of it. It's just very different. But the 3D map, since it's connected to Microsoft and Bing, obviously Mac's not going to do that. So once you have your data set highlighted, hit Open 3D Map. And it's, since you already just selected your data set, it's going to pull that one up for you. This is usually, you can see at the bottom here, it's loading. Give it some time. This might take a couple seconds, depending on how old your computer is. Might take a little longer. Mine varies from day to day, to be honest. It's just one of those things with a desktop. I never know how long it's going to take. I say that, and I thought it was just going to pop up for me. There we go. Give it a second, and it just loaded on my other screen. So I'm going to pull this over, and you can see this is how it originally generated on mine. So it recognized location fields, so it knew I had a city, it knew I had a state, a zip, so it knew I had geographic information. What's cool is it identified all of that and already linked them together, and especially the latitude and longitude. That makes it easy to bring in data. And we'll get into even neighborhood data, but it recognizes it in a World Geographic System, WGS, which is pretty common across program software, everything with that. But as you scroll in, you can see it's getting to Little Rock. These arrows control the angle, the view, everything with that. Oops, now this is way out of whack for me. Scroll out. One of the first things I do usually when I'm zoomed into a city is I come up here, click flat map so it's no longer curved. And with that I also do map labels so you can kind of see what you're looking at. I understand and I'm familiar with Little Rock, but not everyone likely is. So I'm going to take a bird's eye view and look at this. So pretty cool to where you can see where the firearm crimes are occurring. The cool part is what's much more related to broader policing work is what's defined and called as hotspots. If you come over here to the table or the tabs under data, you can see that you have the option to change the visualization to a heat map. And that's truly that. We're generating hotspots or densities of clusters of firearm crimes. Of course, depending on how much you zoom out or zoom in, those clusters change a bit based on our reference frame of the map itself. But a pretty cool feature to look at. The other part that I always like, since we have a good data set that came with temporal data, when I say temporal, that's the date and timestamp, and we have the spatial attributes, we have the city, state, address field, even, and we have latitude and longitude. We can add in the time part down here, so you can see if we add time, it already pulls the incident date for us. So if I click this, you can see now at the bottom I have a time bar itself. You can see at the top it's our last date and time. I'm just going to pull this down so we can kind of see as it goes. If I hit play, it's going to go back to our oldest data in 2017 and move forward. So you can see how some of these hotspots generate over time. I could have limited this data set to only 2021 or 2020 and saw how just those specific years look like for firearm related crime in Little Rock. Pretty cool, pretty handy to get into, and you can always export these as video files, which is always handy to pass along. Again, quick overview of what we'll get into. It's just to kind of highlight the spatial side of the data that we often talk about, manipulate. Excel has expanded to bring some of this in and be very useful for or user friendly, keep it that way. If I exit out of this, it will still be there, so if I want to come back to it, I can always open that map again. If I just hit open, it will give me the option to do it. With that, this was kind of what we covered in class, a very quick overview of, come back to the home tab, and if this ever pops up you can delete it, it's just a text box. But really we covered going over the sort and filter. What's key within the class and our homework assignments is a lot of the first ones, since you're not generating a final report or making a polished map or anything that way, is we'll be using the snipping tool. So you can go through the startup menu and find what's called truly the snipping tool. I have it pinned to my startup program or taskbar itself. So snipping is truly that. If you're used to hitting print screen, it's similar to that as well. If I just hit new, what it allows me to do is highlight an area. I'm doing a rectangle now. By doing that, it's just creating that as potentially a JPEG or a PNG file. So I can write on it if I wanted to, but I also can copy this. If I hit copy, then paste it into a Word document, or I could save it and do the same thing. It gives you a lot of tools in it as well. Even if you made some mistakes on that, you can erase it. Always, you can make a new one based on what you're doing with it. So for the homework assignments, oftentimes I ask for a screenshot or a snip. This is just showing that itself. So it's a lot easier, in my mind, to use the snipping tool versus the print screen and then trying to crop a picture and everything with that. This one is very easy to use that way. With that, these are very introductory parts to Excel. We will continue to use Excel, expand on it in the weeks to come. but it's really just to get used to opening a CSV file and resaving it. We're not going to use CSV files too often. Most of what we'll rely on is Excel base. ArcGIS, our program that we're building to, is good at reading Excel files into it, so we'll be okay there. The sort and filter are two of the main tools that a lot of people use in Excel to get used to it. And then we'll dive more into some of the functions and formulas that help us build towards spatial data and using that in other features and fashions. With that, if there's any questions, like always, reach out. If not, until next time, take care.